I had the pleasure of interviewing my dear friend Nicki here in the great state of Colorado, and she has an insane amount of travel experience, so I really can't wait for her to share her nuggets with you. Time to awaken your travel dreams. Ready? Let's do this.
My name is Nicki and I'm 40 years old. I've been living abroad for the majority of the last 20 years. I've lived in about 9 to 10 countries, including South Korea, Argentina, Brazil, Philippines, Italy, Georgia, but traveled to somewhere around 60 or 70. I think the travel bug bit me because I grew up listening to stories of a really close family friend who lived in Paraguay for about 7 years. So I always heard about these big, cool travel adventures. And so it started to get into my psyche. Once I was in university, I did study abroad, which took me abroad for the first time, where I went to Spain. After my semester in Spain, I traveled Western Europe for about 6 weeks, and it just spread from there. So as soon as I graduated from university, I got a job teaching English in Brazil, and one thing led to the other, and I just kept going, and pretty soon living abroad just felt more comfortable than living in my home country of the United States. Choosing my destinations depends on a number of things. Sometimes if I'm looking for a program to study, that will determine where I end up studying. Sometimes it depends on the economic situation of a country and my personal finances. Sometimes it depends on the time zone and how that works with whatever job I have at the moment. So it's always something a little bit different. I would say a good first international destination for an English speaker could probably be something like Australia or New Zealand. Those countries allow you to have a working holiday visa, so you already know the language. The culture is similar enough, but it's still different because it's a new country and you can work there and travel. If you're a little bit more adventurous than that, I also think that South Korea is a really good destination for English speakers, and I know that might sound funny, but there are tons of English teachers in South Korea. Because of that, it makes it really easy to meet friends. When I went to South Korea, it was probably one of the easiest transitions that I had because my new boss picked me up from the airport, took me to my apartment that he was going to be paying for, and then my coworker took me to work the next day. So everything was just kind of done for me, like leading me along the way in the very beginning, which was really helpful because that was my first time in Asia. It was a little overwhelming. But because people were so helpful there and things were really set up for me, the transition was easy and I never had a hard time finding other English-speaking friends.
By the way, my name is Art and I'm the CEO of this here channel, Gringo Nation, where I like to provide you with travel inspiration, destination guides, and practical tips so that you can go off and live your own epic travel adventure just as I've been doing the past 10 years of my life. So please hit subscribe if that sounds like something you want to hear more about in the future, and if this video has been helpful to you thus far, just give it the old like-a-roo. The next thing I want to know about Nicki is how she feels about traveling with friends versus traveling alone. Go!
I've done both, traveling with friends and traveling on my own. They both have pros and cons. I would say when I was younger, I really liked traveling alone because I was staying in hostels, so it was super easy to meet people, make new friends. You meet someone for the first time and you're like, hey, I'm gonna go do this. Do you wanna come? And they're like, yeah. And then they end up being a lifelong best friend. So traveling in my 20s solo was probably one of the best experiences. It's pretty amazing. It definitely makes you grow and makes you stronger. Traveling with friends is also very fun, but the problem is you really have to find the right person to travel with. I traveled in Central America with a group of us. We were 5, and it was a little bit overwhelming having that many people, but then we kind of branched off. I traveled with one friend and we went to El Salvador and Honduras, and we were perfect travel companions. Same thing when I traveled with my friend Phoebe along the Trans-Siberian in Russia. We just really gelled together and had very similar ideas about what we wanted out of the trip. However, I've also had experiences where I traveled with a friend who didn't speak the local language and I did, and so that ended up causing some conflicts. We had different ideas of what we wanted out of the trip. I think both have pros and cons, but if you travel with friends, you just have to make sure that you kind of discuss the trip beforehand, talk about what you want to do about money and what are your main things that you want to see and do and the style that you want to travel. Yeah, It's definitely safe to travel alone. I think that people, especially in the United States, have a misconception that traveling is something you can't do alone because it's scary. Especially women feel that way, which I completely understand, because women have a whole extra layer of things we need to think about and worry about as traveling in order to keep us safe. But for the most part, I would say yes, absolutely, traveling is safe. There's good people in every country that you go to. There's always someone who's willing to help you. I always get a little bit nervous before I go to a new country, but only nervous because I don't know anything about the country yet, not because I'm worried something will happen to me. I think that safety is also subjective because living in your own country can also be unsafe. In the United States, for example, gun death is the #1 cause for death in children. So it's hard to say that as an American, oh, I feel unsafe going abroad, when in fact, many places abroad I feel safer than I do in my own home country. So in my 2 decades of travel, it's been almost divided up into 2 parts, like the younger part and then the more mature part. Traveling in my 20s, it was super easy to make friends because you're staying at hostels and everyone there, for the most part, is open to new experiences just like you. So everyone wants friends, everyone's there for the same reasons, everyone's looking for the same thing. So staying in hostels is one of the easiest ways to make friends. As you get a bit older, you might not want to stay in hostels, so finding friends can become a little bit more burdensome. It just takes a little extra effort. But the best way that I found to make friends if I'm not staying in a hostel is through Facebook groups. And I know you might be rolling your eyes. I also don't use Facebook in my everyday life, but it is key to find information about countries you're going to and to meet other people who are also there and looking for friends like you. Wherever you're gonna go, just do a search on Facebook and there is definitely a group wherever you're going. The majority of my relationships for the past 20 years have been with non-Americans, just because of my lifestyle. Most people that you meet tend to be very transient, so relationships can last for a few weeks, a few months, and they can be really intense during that time, but then a lot of times the people go their own directions and do their own thing. Different relationships serve different purposes. They don't all have to be super serious and last for years and years. I think it's also kind of fun just to be open to the potential of having a 2-week romantic fling. It's really fun. You have good memories and you make good connections with people, deeper connections with people that way. I've also had relationships where I met a person from that country, and that's really helpful because that person can help you navigate through the country if you have questions. And of course, romantic relationships are the best way to learn a new language. So if you want to get good in Spanish, go to a Spanish-speaking country and find a partner. Loneliness is definitely something that people don't always think about when you're traveling, because when people think about traveling, they think like, ooh, exciting. But loneliness hits you even harder when you're traveling because not only are you physically by yourself, but you're probably in a culture and a country and a language that's not your own. So it makes the loneliness feel a little bit more lonely. I'm very intimate with the feeling of loneliness, and now I'm pretty comfortable with it, but of course there's a lot of things that I have learned to do to help me get through those periods. One thing that's important for me is to stay in touch with my friends, with those really good like soul friends and people that you have in your life. That just allows me a chance to just express myself, and after that conversation of really being open and honest with someone I trust, I feel so much better. Another thing that I like to do is just to do something that I really enjoy. For example, I like going to a coffee shop and just reading a book. And so doing something really simple like this kind of allows me to get out of that loneliness state. Absolutely not. You have to be wealthy if you want to spend like 6 months in Iceland. If you don't want to do that, there's a ton of other options, and you just have to research and figure out which countries will allow your dollar to stretch further. The United States has incredibly high rents and high cost of everything. And so Americans tend to think that because it's like that here, it's like that everywhere, and they think that they can't afford to travel. The thing is, you can actually save money by leaving the country than you can by staying, because the average rent in the United States is like, I don't know, $1,500, $2,000 a month. In Argentina, I was paying $400 a month. So you're already saving money on rent. And if you're not looking for somewhere to live, the cost of other things in other countries is also much more affordable. Clothing, food. The main thing is medical tourism as well, because you can get Botox, you can get manicures, pedicures. I got new teeth in Georgia, teeth cleanings, laser hair removal, all of those things at a fraction of the cost in the United States. You could spend a month in another country, including flights, accommodation, food, and whatever like medical tourism you want to do, and it's still going to be cheaper than what you spend in 1 month in the United States. Good question. So I've taught a lot of English. I taught English in Brazil, Argentina, and South Korea. I have also worked in restaurants and pubs in Australia. In New Zealand, I worked on farms. I've also worked for American companies abroad, just as a digital nomad. I also do online things. I create t-shirt designs and sell them. I wrote a book about Buenos Aires and I sell that. I make city guides for people looking to travel to different destinations, and I make money through that. So as you go, you start to find different ways that you can make money, and that just sort of increases as you go. So there's actually a lot of ways to cut costs while traveling. A lot of it depends on how long you're going to be going. For example, with Airbnb, you get a discount if you stay somewhere for a month or for a whole week. There are also other programs that you can do where it's like an exchange. So you can sleep somewhere for free in exchange for a few hours of work per day. So a lot of it is not just necessarily spending more or less, but in exchange so you're not spending money at all. Of course, a way to cut costs for food is going to the supermarket instead of going to restaurants, getting street food or food from tents. And when it comes to restaurants, usually the restaurants in the center of a town are for tourists, so of course they're more expensive. So try to go a little bit outside of the main center and look for a place where locals are and local people, because it's always going to be probably better and more affordable. The best ways to find accommodation really depend on the country. For example, in Argentina, Airbnb is super expensive, so I didn't really use it. I would look on Google and call places directly. A lot of times I'll go through a lot of different platforms and see what has the best prices. So booking.com, Vrbo, Airbnb, Google, calling places directly, looking directly on websites. And then whatever has the cheapest or the best deals, I'll go with that. Of course, if you don't mind staying in hostels, sharing accommodation will always be more affordable. If you're in shared rooms, or if you just rent a room from someone on Airbnb rather than getting an entire place. I would say the best thing that I've done for myself recently is get global entry, because it's $100, but it lasts 5 years. And when you go through TSA or any entrance, you don't have to take off your shoes, you don't have to take out your computer. And that for me is huge, because I always travel with so much electronics, like my camera, my iPad, my Kindle, my computer. Just not taking that stuff out and not taking off my shoes has been amazing. Plus you get to cut the lines, so you don't have to stress out as much. If you're running a little bit late, you can not be stressed about waiting in a really long line, knowing that TSA or global entry usually has a much shorter line. I would say that the biggest travel mistake that newbies make, and I know it from experience because I did this when I started traveling, was thinking that I had to see everything. Like when I traveled Western Europe for 6 weeks, the first time I ever traveled, I thought I had to go to like every single country. So I ended up spending just like, 2 days here, 3 days here. So like, do I really know Prague? Not really, I was there for 2 days. But now my style of travel has changed so much more, so I would much rather choose 1 or 2 places, spend a lot more time there, because that also gives me time to just relax and soak in the culture. Trying to see every museum and every tourist site is exhausting, and honestly, you'll stop enjoying the trip. Wouldn't you rather just go to 1 or 2 places to spend more time and really enjoy yourself, really get to know the culture, and really get to know people who are from there?
I would.
I would too. Sometimes I've just tried to drink a lot of red wine and pass out, and that's worked before. I usually become very prepared just in case, because of course there's movies on the flight. Sometimes the screens don't work, so at least I have movies downloaded on my iPad, and if I don't feel like watching movies, I have my Kindle. I make sure to download a ton of podcasts before I go. So no matter what, I have something to occupy my mind. Something I would never pack would be like a blow dryer or a hair straightener, things like that. Because when I'm traveling, I guess I like to be as simplistic and minimalist as possible, and just packing those things feels like unnecessary weight, space that you're using in your bag. A lot of places have hair dryers, but I just don't worry too much about like having like perfect beauty or whatever when I'm traveling. An item that I always pack is my journal. I like to have a journal. I've been journaling for like 20 years, so I make sure that I have a journal with me whenever I travel. I suppose if I had to choose one item to always bring, I want to make sure I have a book or a Kindle with me. Yes. What I always use is Safety Wing because it's made by nomads for nomads, so they completely understand this life. You can start a plan at any point and you can choose it for just the specific days that you're going. They don't lock you into anything like a one-year contract or anything. I highly, highly suggest Safety Wing. My advice to someone who's thinking about traveling but hasn't yet is just go. The mental hurdles that you have to get over are the biggest thing because you think you can't do it alone or you think you can't do it with a certain amount of money, but you really just can. Like, you're never gonna arrive to somewhere and just like fall over and collapse and die. Like, if you haven't done it, it feels so overwhelming because you don't know what to do. But if you go one step at a time and you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, it will just keep getting easier and easier. You book the flight, then you find a place to stay, and then you research the location. Once you get off the plane, it feels like you know a little bit more, and so you just take that next step that you have to take. So my advice is just stop worrying about it and just do it.
I fully agree with Nicki about how you can actually save money living outside of the US. If you want more details on that, you can dive a little deeper in this video where I simulate a nomadic journey around the world on the equivalent of a 3-month budget only in the United States. So let's keep on chatting. I'll see you over there in that video in 3, 2, 1.